He rejected 31 blind dates without hesitation, but the woman who would change his life was already working 10 feet from his office door. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe real character matters more than status, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Adrian DeLuca. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the DeLuca headquarters as Manhattan glowed beneath a blanket of silver light. Inside the private dining room on the 42nd floor, another carefully arranged blind date was coming to an end. Across the table sat a woman chosen by Adrian's mother. She was elegant, well-connected, and perfectly aware of who Adrian DeLuca was. She smiled at all the right moments. She spoke about luxury travel, exclusive memberships, and the advantages of merging influential families. Adrian listened for exactly 12 minutes. Then he placed his coffee cup on the table and stood. "Thank you for your time," he said calmly. "I don't think this will work." The woman blinked in disbelief. "You haven't even finished dessert." Adrian adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit. "That's because I already know the answer." Without another word, he walked out. Behind him, his mother closed her eyes in frustration. This was blind date number 31. 31 carefully selected introductions. 31 opportunities. 31 rejections. By now, nobody was surprised anymore. Adrian DeLuca was 36 years old, successful beyond imagination, respected throughout the city, and completely uninterested in romance. People assumed he was impossible to please. Some believed he was incapable of love altogether. But the truth was more complicated. Adrian simply refused to force feelings that didn't exist. As he stepped into the executive hallway, his phone vibrated. 3 missed calls, 12 unread emails, 2 scheduling conflicts, a canceled meeting, an investor demanding immediate attention. Adrian sighed. Before he could say a word, another notification appeared. Then another, and another. Yet somewhere else in the building, a woman had already solved every one of those problems. Simone Carter sat alone beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp. The office floor had emptied hours ago. Cleaning crews had already passed through. Most employees were home with their families. But Simone remained at her desk. Her dark curls were tied neatly back. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside a stack of reports. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she reorganized schedules, answered urgent messages, and repaired a dozen small crises nobody else even knew existed. She had done this for nearly 4 years. Quietly, efficiently, invisibly. When executives praised Adrian's flawless organization, nobody mentioned Simone. When meetings ran perfectly, nobody mentioned Simone. When disasters somehow disappeared before reaching Adrian's desk, nobody mentioned Simone. And she never asked them to. At 11:23 that night, Adrian finally entered his office. The city lights reflected across the glass walls as he loosened his tie. That was when he noticed a faint light still glowing beneath the doorway of the assistant's office. He frowned. Everyone should have been gone by now. Slowly, he opened the door. Simone looked up from her computer, surprised but composed. "Good evening, Mr. DeLuca," she said softly. Adrian glanced at the clock, then at the mountain of completed work spread across her desk. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar crossed his expression. Not admiration. Not yet. Just curiosity. And neither of them realized that this ordinary late-night encounter was the first quiet step toward a love story neither had ever expected. Simone Carter's alarm rang at 4:30 every morning, long before the sun touched the skyline. She would lie still for a few seconds, listening to the familiar hum of the old apartment building in Brooklyn and gathering enough energy to face another day. The apartment was small, barely 700 square feet, with aging floors that creaked beneath every step and windows that rattled whenever winter winds swept through the neighborhood. Yet to Simone, it was home. It was where her mother slept in the room across the hall, and where every paycheck she earned seemed to disappear before the month ended. By 5:15, Simone was already dressed and preparing breakfast. Oatmeal for her mother, coffee for herself. A carefully organized pill container sat beside the kitchen sink. She checked it every morning before leaving. Her mother, Denise Carter, had spent decades working as a school secretary before health problems forced her into early retirement. Medical bills had accumulated quietly at first. Then all at once. Simone never complained about it. She simply worked harder. Few people knew that the polished executive assistant who managed one of New York's busiest schedules often spent her evenings reviewing insurance paperwork and negotiating payment plans. Even fewer knew that after leaving the office, she logged into a freelance administrative platform and completed additional projects until midnight. Every extra dollar mattered. Every extra hour mattered. At DeLuca headquarters, however, none of that showed on her face. By 8 o'clock sharp, Simone appeared calm, organized, and completely professional. She greeted executives with confidence, coordinated meetings, and solved problems before they became emergencies. Most people assumed she lived a comfortable life because she worked so closely with powerful individuals. Appearances were misleading. On a gray Thursday afternoon, Simone stepped into a conference room carrying a stack of revised contracts. Through the glass walls, she could see Adrian speaking with investors. His posture remained confident. His expression never revealed fatigue. To the outside world, he seemed untouchable. Yet after 4 years working beside him, Simone knew better. She knew which meetings exhausted him. She knew when he skipped lunch. She knew that despite his reputation, he quietly paid college tuition for the children of several retired employees. She knew he never sought recognition for those acts. That knowledge had earned her respect long before admiration ever entered the picture. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Simone returned to her desk and opened her banking application. Her stomach tightened. Another medical payment was due within 72 hours. She studied the numbers in silence. The balance was lower than she had hoped. Outside her office window, Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of lights. For a moment, exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. Then she closed the application, opened another spreadsheet, and continued working. Across the hall, Adrian exited his office carrying a folder. As he passed by, he noticed the familiar glow beneath her doorway once again. The same glow he had seen the night before. The same glow that remained long after everyone else had left. This time he paused. Not because he needed something. Not because there was a problem. For the first time, Adrian DeLuca found himself wondering what kind of person willingly carried burdens nobody else could see. The following Tuesday began like every other day in Simone Carter's carefully balanced life. Meetings filled the calendar. Phone calls arrived faster than she could answer them. Executives requested changes to presentations that had already been approved. Deadlines moved. Expectations grew. Yet somehow everything continued moving forward because Simone quietly held the pieces together. Shortly after 6 in the evening, the last major meeting finally ended. Employees streamed toward elevators, eager to return home. Simone gathered her notes, shut down her computer, and left the building carrying a worn leather tote bag. The air outside felt colder than expected. Dark clouds rolled across the city, threatening rain. She hurried toward the subway station, already calculating how much time remained before she needed to help her mother with dinner and medication. Across town, Adrian sat in the back of a black sedan as traffic crawled through Manhattan. He had spent the entire day reviewing reports, negotiating contracts, and attending meetings he did not want to attend. The city lights reflected against the window beside him. Normally, he ignored everything outside the vehicle. Tonight, his attention drifted. At an intersection in Brooklyn, traffic came to a complete stop. Adrian glanced toward the sidewalk and immediately recognized someone. Simone stood beside an older man's pickup truck parked near the curb. Rain had begun falling in thin silver lines. The elderly driver looked frustrated as he stared at a damaged tire. Without hesitation, Simone set down her bag, rolled up the sleeves of her coat, and knelt beside the vehicle. Adrian watched in silence. The old man appeared embarrassed. Simone simply smiled and continued helping. Together they unloaded a spare tire from the truck bed. The task was messy. Rain soaked her clothes. Passing pedestrians barely noticed. Yet she remained patient, listening as the man spoke. Several times he laughed. Several times she laughed with him. There was no audience, no reward, no advantage to be gained. She was helping because someone needed help. Adrian found himself staring longer than he intended. His driver noticed. "Everything all right, sir?" Adrian did not answer immediately. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watched Simone finish the task. Once the spare tire was secured, the elderly man reached for his wallet. Simone shook her head. The man insisted. Again she refused. Finally, he hugged her shoulders like a grateful grandfather. Only then did she pick up her bag and continued down the sidewalk. The traffic light changed. Their vehicle moved forward. Yet Adrian kept looking back until she disappeared from view. That night, long after returning home, he found himself thinking about the scene. He had met countless people who performed kindness when cameras were present. Countless people who treated generosity like a business transaction. What he had witnessed was different. Quiet. Genuine. Unexpected. The next morning, Simone arrived at the office exactly on time. Her appearance was professional as always, though faint traces of exhaustion lingered beneath her eyes. She stepped into Adrian's office carrying the day's schedule. "Good morning, Mr. DeLuca," she said. Adrian looked up from his desk. For a brief second, he saw not only his assistant but the woman standing in the rain helping a stranger. Something shifted deep inside him. It was not love. It was not even attraction. It was something far more dangerous. Respect. 3 days after the rainy evening in Brooklyn, a discovery landed on Adrian DeLuca's desk that was never meant to attract his attention. The morning had begun with routine efficiency. Reports arrived. Meetings filled every available hour. Investors requested revisions. Department heads waited outside his office for approvals. Somewhere in the middle of the chaos, the Human Resources Director forwarded a collection of personnel records that required executive signatures. Normally, Adrian would have approved them without reading a single page. That was why he had an entire management team. But as he flipped through the files, one familiar name caught his eye. Simone Carter. For reasons he could not fully explain, he paused. The folder was thinner than he expected. He opened it. What began as a casual glance quickly became focused attention. Adrian leaned back in his chair as line after line revealed details he had never known. Simone had graduated at the top of her university class. She had earned academic honors every year. Recommendation letters described her as exceptional, disciplined, and remarkably gifted at leadership. One professor wrote that she possessed the potential to lead a Fortune 500 company before the age of 40. Another described her as one of the brightest students he had taught in 20 years. Adrian frowned. None of that matched the story he thought he knew. He continued reading. A prestigious graduate fellowship had been offered immediately after graduation. Several major corporations had attempted to recruit her. Salaries far exceeded what she earned now. Yet every opportunity had been declined. No explanation was listed. Adrian closed the folder halfway, then opened it again. Something about the information bothered him. Not because Simone lacked ambition. The opposite. Everything in the file suggested extraordinary ambition. Yet somewhere along the way she had chosen a different path. Later that afternoon, curiosity overcame him. During a quiet moment between meetings, he called the Human Resources Director. "Why did Simone leave those opportunities?" he asked. The director seemed surprised by the question. "Family circumstances, from what I understand." "What kind of circumstances?" "Her father passed away shortly before graduation. Her mother became ill not long afterward. I believe she became the primary caregiver." The room fell silent. Adrian stared through the glass walls of his office at the city beyond. Suddenly the pieces began fitting together. The late nights. The constant dedication. The exhaustion she tried to hide. The second jobs he suspected but had never confirmed. Opportunities had not passed Simone by. She had sacrificed them. Not for recognition. Not for praise. For family. That evening, as employees filtered toward the elevators, Adrian noticed Simone gathering documents outside the conference room. She looked exactly as she always did. Professional. Organized. Composed. No sign of regret. No sign of resentment. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never mentioning the dreams she had postponed. Adrian watched as she helped a junior employee organize presentation materials before returning to her own workload. Nobody thanked her. Nobody noticed. Simone simply smiled and continued working. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself questioning his own assumptions. He had spent most of his life surrounded by people chasing power, influence, and advantage. Yet the woman sitting outside his office had willingly given up opportunities others would have done anything to obtain. As the evening lights illuminated Manhattan once again, Adrian looked toward her office and realized something unsettling. The more he learned about Simone Carter, the less invisible she became. The first sign that something was wrong appeared on a Monday morning. Simone arrived at the office to find 3 department managers waiting outside Adrian's conference room with worried expressions. Overnight, several important project files had become inaccessible. Deadlines that affected millions of dollars were suddenly at risk. Phones rang continuously. Emails flooded inboxes faster than employees could answer them. Anxiety spread through the building like a storm cloud. Adrian spent the first 2 hours in back-to-back meetings trying to understand what had happened. Every update seemed worse than the last. Vendors were demanding answers. Executives wanted explanations. Investors were requesting emergency calls. Throughout the chaos, Simone remained remarkably calm. She organized response teams, coordinated communication between departments, and created contingency schedules that allowed critical operations to continue. More than once, employees looked ready to panic. More than once, Simone quietly guided them back to work. By late afternoon, the situation had become the largest internal crisis the company had faced in years. A senior executive named Victor Hale emerged as one of the loudest voices demanding accountability. Victor had worked with Adrian for more than a decade and enjoyed considerable influence throughout the organization. During an emergency leadership meeting, he leaned forward and folded his hands. "There is something everyone keeps overlooking," he said. The room became silent. The compromised files required executive-level access. Several people exchanged uneasy glances. Victor continued. Only a handful of employees possessed that level of authorization. Adrian listened without speaking. And among those employees, Victor added carefully, Simone manages more sensitive information than anyone. The words hung in the room. Nobody openly agreed. Nobody openly disagreed. Yet suspicion had been introduced, and suspicion had a way of growing quickly. Simone sat quietly at the end of the table. Her expression never changed. She simply listened. Adrian immediately disliked where the conversation was heading. Still, facts mattered. Procedures mattered. An investigation had to occur. By evening, outside consultants were brought in to review the situation. Access logs, communication records, and system reports were examined. Hours passed. Employees whispered in hallways. Rumors spread. For the first time in years, Simone noticed people avoiding eye contact. The following morning, preliminary findings created even greater concern. Certain activities appeared connected to credentials assigned through her department. The evidence was incomplete, but enough uncertainty existed to trigger company policy. Adrian stared at the report resting on his desk. Every instinct told him something felt wrong. Nothing about Simone matched the picture being painted. Yet instincts were not. Evidence. Policy required action. When Simone entered his office that afternoon, she already seemed to know why she had been called. Sunlight filtered through the windows behind Adrian as silence settled between them. Finally he spoke. "Until the review is complete, I have to place you on administrative leave." Simone lowered her eyes briefly. Not in shame. Not in anger. More like disappointment. Adrian waited for an argument. He expected questions. Explanations. A defense. Instead, Simone simply nodded. She removed her identification badge and placed it gently on the desk. "I understand," she said softly. "Simone," Adrian began, but the words never arrived. She offered a professional smile that somehow made the moment feel worse. Then she turned and walked toward the door. As it closed behind her, an unfamiliar emptiness settled over the office. For the first time in 4 years, the desk outside Adrian DeLuca's office sat completely empty. The days that followed felt strangely hollow. Employees continued arriving every morning. Meetings continued filling conference rooms. Reports continued appearing on Adrian DeLuca's desk. From the outside, the company looked exactly the same. Inside, however, something had changed. It began with small things. A scheduling conflict that should have been resolved in minutes remained unresolved for hours. An executive arrived at the wrong meeting. A client call was accidentally double-booked. Important documents took longer to locate. None of the mistakes were catastrophic. Yet together they created a quiet reminder of how much Simone Carter had been doing behind the scenes. Adrian noticed every one of them. By the end of the first week, he found himself looking toward the empty desk outside his office more often than he wanted to admit. The chair remained perfectly pushed in. Her computer monitor sat dark. A small plant she had kept near the window was beginning to droop from neglect. One evening, long after most employees had left, Adrian stood beside that desk in silence. For 4 years he had walked past it without a second thought. Now its emptiness seemed impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Simone spent her days searching for temporary work while helping her mother through another round of medical appointments. She never complained. She never called former coworkers seeking sympathy. She simply moved forward the way she always had. Yet uncertainty followed her everywhere. Savings that had taken years to build were disappearing faster than expected. Every prescription refill carried another expense. Every bill felt heavier than the one before. One rainy afternoon, she sat beside her mother in a crowded clinic waiting room. Denise noticed the worry Simone tried so hard to hide. "You have always carried too much by yourself," she said gently. Simone smiled. "Everything will work out." Denise studied her daughter carefully. "You always say that." Simone looked toward the window. The truth was she did not know if it would. Back at headquarters, the investigation continued. Consultants reviewed records. Specialists examined access logs. Entire departments were questioned. Adrian attended every briefing. The deeper investigators looked, the more inconsistencies they discovered. Certain timelines did not match. Certain records appeared manipulated. Small details began pointing away from Simone and toward another possibility. One Friday evening, Adrian remained alone in the conference room reviewing findings. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls while city lights shimmered below. As he turned another page, something caught his attention. A timestamp, then another, then a third. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they told a different story. Adrian sat forward slowly. For the first time since the investigation began, doubt transformed into conviction. Simone had not caused the crisis. In fact, evidence suggested she may have unknowingly prevented something much worse months earlier. His jaw tightened. Suddenly, he remembered every moment from the past several weeks. The quiet dignity with which she accepted suspension, the absence of excuses, the disappointment in her eyes. Most of all, he remembered that she never once tried to defend herself. The room felt very still. Adrian closed the file and stared through the darkness beyond the windows. Somewhere across the city, Simone was facing consequences she did not deserve. And for the first time, the possibility of losing her no longer felt like an inconvenience. It felt like a mistake he might never forgive himself for making. The breakthrough arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning. While most employees focused on their daily responsibilities, a team of investigators completed a final review of the company records. The conclusion was impossible to ignore. The security breach had not originated from Simone Carter. Every trail that had pointed toward her had been deliberately altered. Every suspicious activity connected to her credentials had been carefully staged. And behind it all stood Victor Hale. For years, Victor had cultivated a reputation for loyalty and professionalism. Few people questioned him. Few people looked closely enough to notice the inconsistencies hidden beneath the surface. Now the truth sat in a report on Adrian DeLuca's desk. Adrian read every page twice. Then a third time. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet what affected him most was not Victor's deception. It was what he discovered about Simone while reviewing months of archived communications. Buried inside old reports and forgotten email chains were dozens of examples nobody had noticed before. 6 months earlier, Simone had identified accounting discrepancies that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. A year earlier, she had quietly prevented a major client from terminating a contract after spending an entire weekend preparing alternative proposals. There were emergency situations Adrian barely remembered because they had been resolved before reaching his attention. Again and again, Simone's name appeared behind successful outcomes. Not once had she claimed credit. Not once had she requested recognition. Adrian leaned back in his chair and stared at the skyline beyond his office window. The realization settled heavily over him. Some of the accomplishments people attributed to his leadership had only been possible because Simone was standing beside him. He remembered every late night, every carefully organized schedule, every problem that somehow disappeared before becoming a crisis. For years he had assumed excellence simply happened around her. Now he understood that she had been creating it. Later that afternoon, Adrian walked through the executive floor. Employees greeted him respectfully, but he barely noticed. His thoughts remained fixed on one person. The empty desk outside his office no longer represented an absent employee. It represented someone he had failed. Someone who had carried responsibilities far beyond her job description while asking for nothing in return. Across the city, Simone sat in a small waiting area at a temporary staffing agency. She wore the same professional confidence she always carried, but exhaustion lingered beneath the surface. The past few weeks had drained her savings, her energy, and much of her certainty about the future. Even so, she remained polite to everyone she met. A young receptionist accidentally spilled coffee near the front desk. Before anyone else reacted, Simone helped clean the mess. The receptionist thanked her repeatedly. Simone simply smiled. Some habits never changed. Back at headquarters, Adrian closed the investigation file and stood. For the first time in many years, a business problem felt deeply personal. He had spent most of his life trusting facts over feelings, evidence over instinct. Yet his instincts about Simone had been right from the beginning. The woman he had doubted was the very person who had protected his company time and time again. And as that truth settled into his heart, another truth emerged beside it, quieter but impossible to ignore. Adrian no longer feared losing an exceptional employee. He feared losing Simone herself. The address took Adrian DeLuca less than an hour to find. The decision to go there had taken far longer. For days he had reviewed facts, reports, and evidence, but none of those things explained the weight pressing against his chest as he drove through Brooklyn beneath a gray evening sky. The investigation was over. Simone Carter had been cleared completely. Victor Hale had been removed from the company. The truth was finally known. Yet somehow that did not feel like enough. When Adrian arrived at the apartment building, he immediately understood how much. He still did not know. The brick structure was old. Paint peeled from the railings. A flickering hallway light struggled against the approaching darkness. This was where Simone returned every night after spending her days helping manage one of the most successful organizations in New York. Adrian sat in his car for several moments before stepping outside. As he approached the entrance, he noticed a familiar vehicle parked near the curb. Simone's car. The driver's side door stood open. Simone was beside it speaking with a man from a local dealership. Even from a distance, Adrian could see the strain on her face. The conversation lasted only a minute longer before the man handed her paperwork and drove away. Simone remained standing beside the empty parking space for several seconds. Her shoulders seemed smaller somehow. More tired. More human. Adrian slowly approached. Simone looked up and froze. Surprise crossed her face. Then confusion. "Mr. DeLuca?" she asked softly. Adrian glanced toward the empty curb. "You sold your car." Simone followed his gaze. For a moment she appeared embarrassed. "I did." "Why?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Simone lowered her eyes. "My mother needed another treatment. Insurance only covered part of it." The simplicity of her answer hit harder than any explanation could have. No self-pity. No complaint. Just the truth. A sudden breeze swept through the street. Simone folded her arms against the cold. Adrian noticed how exhausted she looked. Not physically alone. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent years carrying burdens nobody else could see. "You should not have had to do that," he said quietly. Simone offered a faint smile. "Sometimes we do what we have to do." Before Adrian could respond, a phone rang inside her bag. She answered immediately. The color drained from her face. "What happened?" she asked. Silence followed. Then another question. "Is she okay?" Adrian watched concern replace every other emotion. When the call ended, Simone pressed her hand against her forehead. "The hospital called," she whispered. "My mother is having complications." Adrian did not hesitate. "I will drive you." "You do not need to, Simone." His voice was calm but firm. "Let me help." For the first time since he had known her, Simone's composure cracked. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away quickly, embarrassed by the emotion. But Adrian had already seen it. In that quiet Brooklyn street, beneath fading daylight and distant city sounds, he finally understood something that no investigation report could reveal. Simone Carter had spent years being strong for everyone else. And somehow, without realizing when it happened, Adrian wanted to be strong for her. 2 months later, the grand ballroom of the DeLuca family estate glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and soft golden light. New York's most influential families filled the room, dressed in tailored suits and elegant gowns, all gathered for what many believed would be a historic announcement. Rumors had circulated for weeks. Some expected a business alliance. Others expected an engagement arranged between powerful families. Adrian DeLuca had revealed nothing. He greeted guests politely, accepted handshakes, and answered questions with his usual calm reserve. Yet anyone who knew him well could sense something was different. Across the room, Simone Carter stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the city skyline. Her mother had recovered steadily over the past several weeks. The company had publicly cleared her name and offered her position back immediately. She had accepted, though life no longer felt quite the same. Since the evening at the hospital, a quiet understanding had developed between her and Adrian. Neither had rushed to define it. Neither had needed to. Respect had become friendship. Friendship had become trust. And somewhere along the way, something deeper had taken root. The orchestra softened as Adrian stepped onto the small stage at the center of the ballroom. Conversations faded. Glasses lowered. Every eye turned toward him. For a moment, he simply looked across the crowd. Then he spoke. Many of you have spent years trying to help me find the perfect woman. Laughter moved through the room. Adrian smiled slightly. My family arranged instructions. Friends offered advice. Business partners made recommendations. I appreciate every effort. More laughter followed. Then his expression grew thoughtful. The truth is, I kept saying no because I was looking for qualities that cannot be found on a resume, inside a social circle, or through an introduction. The ballroom became silent. Adrian stepped down from the stage. Slowly, he walked through the crowd. Guests exchanged confused glances as he moved toward the back of the room. Toward Simone. Her heart began to race. The room seemed to disappear around her. Adrian stopped a few feet away and looked directly into her eyes. I was searching everywhere except the place I should have been looking all along, he said softly. A few people gasped. Others smiled as realization spread through the crowd. Adrian turned slightly, so everyone could hear. The woman I admire most was standing beside me every day. She worked harder than anyone I have ever known. She sacrificed opportunities for her family. She showed kindness when nobody was watching. And she taught me that character matters more than status. Simone felt tears fill her eyes. Adrian gently took her hand. Simone Carter, you were never invisible. I was simply too blind to see what was right in front of me. The ballroom remained completely still. Then applause began. Soft at first, then louder, and louder still. Simone smiled through tears as Adrian drew her closer. Outside, the lights of New York shimmered against the night sky. Inside, something far more important had finally found its place. For the first time in his life, Adrian chose love without hesitation. And for the first time in years, Simone allowed herself to believe she deserved it. And that day, everyone in the room remembered what dignity, loyalty, and love truly looked like. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can discover stories that remind us that the greatest relationships are built not on power, but on character.